First, www.reddit.com, RHF ist I, comments onimost 48, the impossible planet, at medium source share and utnim medium, web 3x and ut deep tima, menen web 3x, ut na source share and utnim bium web 3x and utnim amad web 3x CSCS and utnim term bon and UTE content share but Johann Edgar, American NSA Director Ars, May 28, 2148. The 20 hours following our first look at that spaceship felt like a fever dream. Emergency meetings blurred together as I went over the same information again and again. Every few minutes in a briefing room that increasingly smelled of sweat, the President had to take another call from one of our allies demanding what little information we actually possessed. For the safety of the American people, we have to assume hostility, barked the head of the Department of Defense, Nathan Holt, glaring across the table with eyes that felt like iron sights. Mr. President, give us the go-ahead and we can shoot it down. Dishy. President Stine, if these extraterrestrials can cross interstellar distances, I'm not sure how effective our weapons would even be, blurted the head of NASA, Seth Aldridge, smoothing back his disheveled brown hair as he spoke. We have no way of knowing what they're capable of. If they've come in peace and we shoot them down, it's an act of war. President Drake Stine was not a man I was used to seeing shaken. Usually his voice never sounded more concerned than when it was carrying the question, "How is this going to affect my re-election?" Now, I could tell there was a much more important issue on his mind. Whatever happened in this boardroom today would echo through the history of mankind for as long as we lived, which, if he made the wrong choice, might not be very long at all. Do we have any idea what they want? He sighed, the bags under his eyes pronounced from lack of sleep. No, sir. I shook my head, the sheer weight of our situation making me crave a cigarette for the first time in 10 years. They haven't broadcast any demands yet. If they understood our language, they likely would have used it in their message, NASA's director explained. If nothing else, I highly doubt they're here for war. What makes you say that? The Dodi head growled, more a challenge than a question. Pausing to take a gulp of his third energy drink since sitting down, the NASA director gestured with his free hand toward the image in front of the projector. They only brought one ship and they haven't fired any weapons yet. If they were just here to kill us, chances are we'd already be dead. President Stine cleared his throat, instantly silencing us as we deferred to whatever he was about to say. However, before he could state his conclusion, the phone on his desk began to ring. When he picked it up, I half expected to hear the aliens themselves. Instead, it was the United Nations Secretary General. The European Union is calling for an emergency summit to discuss the signal, Secretary General Vazel began, the soft authority in her voice crystal clear even over the phone. While most of the UN's power remained symbolic, Alice Vazel was one of the few people I knew who could talk in a way that made the world's most powerful people listen. No individual action is to be taken by the United States or other nations to contact or neutralize this vessel until we have convened for a direct discussion. Hearing this, Holt looked like he was about to blow a gasket. She has no authority to make such demands of us. He began as soon as Stine put down the phone. We cannot afford to waste time on a summit with the toothless UNJ. This issue affects the safety of Americans and therefore we have the right to respond as we see fit. Dear Zoran, I'm going to the summit, President Stine concluded, ignoring the Warhawk's posturing. Halt, get us to DEFCON 3, and tell Space Command to raise orbital tracking status. Aldridge, contact Lenfield. He's going to meet me and Edgar at the summit in New York. None. Yes, Mr. President, Aldridge replied, the same words then repeated somewhat begrudgingly by Holt. In the few hours between our meeting's end and my departure for New York alongside President Stine, I had just enough time to dip back home for breakfast and a shower. On my way home, protesters seemed to be on every street corner, demanding answers from Washington. Answers we didn't have. With the signal still broadcasting over every radio station, I chose to connect my phone and listen instead to the news. In his official statement, President Stine had this to say to the public. The president's voice as he spoke was stern, but a tint of warmth bordering on fatherly, the very same tone that had won him the election not long before. My fellow Americans, on May 27th at 7:46 in the morning, a signal of unknown origin was broadcast on every radio channel in the United States. Rest assured that we are investigating the signal's source and will be in full cooperation with the United Nations. We ask that you refrain at this time from panic or speculation, and let us fulfill our duty to keep America safe. Daniel sir. Breakfast was a short affair that morning. My wife, Lena, made pancakes, bacon, and eggs. Stress and hunger warred within my body as she placed the plate in front of me. In the end, hunger won, and I wolfed it all down in a matter of minutes. "Joey," she asked, using the short form of my name that I gave her on our first date after panicking, because Johann was apparently too long. "I know you can't tell us anything specific, but I have to know, are we safe here?" She gestured to our son, Wyatt, who I could tell was pretending not to be listening. He was only 9, but a smart kid nevertheless. "I don't know," I replied honestly. For someone whose entire career was information, there were no 3 words I dreaded more than those. "But we'll figure it out," I continued, forcing a smile as I stood and adjusted my fresh tie. Traveling by motorcade in New York in a back seat alongside President Stine, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. All over the world, people were talking about the signal that had made itself impossible to ignore. Talk show hosts who normally only looked at stars when they came from Hollywood were meeting up on morning television to discuss the news. Social media continued its ongoing explosion, the public's normally short-term memory refusing to relinquish this historic event. "Why do you think they're here?" the president asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the engine's hum and the chorus of gravelly road beneath tires. The way Stine spoke told me that this wasn't a question he expected a definitive answer to. Even still, I decided to keep quiet and reserve my judgment. Hours later, as I stepped into the United Nations headquarters alongside the president, we could already hear the bickering from the lobby. Frantic aides desperately coordinated with security teams from every major power on Earth, a qualifier that, until recently, I assumed just meant everyone. Stepping in, I was surprised to see Lao Chen, chairman of the Chinese government, already sitting amongst the other leaders, flanked on either side by silent bodyguards, his almost pitch-black eyes inscrutable as always. Maybe it was a power play to show off their new hypersonic jets, or maybe this was important that he demanded to be here before the president. Either way, the conversation had already fallen in line around him. "President Stine," he greeted, offering a handshake as Drake sat down in his designated seat beside him. To the left of the president, Russia's seat was still empty, though from what I'd heard the Kremlin was en route. "Chairman Lao," the president replied, returning the offered handshake. "Good to see you were able to make it on such short notice." "This issue impacts all of humanity," the chairman replied, his accent pronounced. "We did not want the U.S. to make any or brash decisions without our input." Calm though his tone was, I could feel the frustration that seethed beneath. Hearing the opening, Germany's Chancellor, Marie Bauer, piled on her own admonishment. "Your SETI program already replied to the signal. Such behavior was reckless at best. Why did you authorize a response so quickly?" "Must." Stine's expression remained cool and impassive, even as the French and Canadian prime ministers joined in on condemning the response. "I didn't authorize that return signal to be broadcast," he replied at last with a heavy sigh. "It wasn't meant to be sent until I'd discussed it with all of you, but a software error blasted it prematurely. Clearly the U.S. cannot be trusted to handle the situation with the care it deserves," proclaimed Chairman Lau, his fierce gaze burrowing into the President's head. "Madam Secretary General, it is the humble position of my administration that China should take the lead in future contact attempts." "Hold it right there," a voice boomed from the chamber's entrance. There, standing between his bodyguards, was Russian President Mikhail Novikov, a white-haired mountain of a man who looked like the Russian winter given life. It was foolish for the Americans to speak as the voice of humanity, but I do not believe China should simply be handed such an honor either. This issue affects all of us, and therefore should be handled unilaterally. Secretary General Vazel? No, and Alice Vazel, who had up until that point been uncharacteristically quiet, nodded along in response to Mikhail's statement. "President Novikov is correct," she added, her voice quieting the room with ease, as Mikhail assumed his seat beside Stine, just close enough to put me on edge. "This is a historic event, and must be handled delicately. Lenfield, as the director of SETI, what is your perspective on how this should be handled?" "Isiya, and foi." Beside, the squirrely scientist with red hair and a face wrinkled beyond his years cleared his throat nervously. I believe that we should form an impromptu contact council to prepare an official response and interpret any further from the ship," he explained, visibly straining under the presence of the UN leaders. "Every nation should elect 2 representatives, 1 political, 1 scientific." "Only 2 for each nation?" Lau balked, sounding both surprised and offended by the notion. "Surely for the sake of fairness it should be based on population." "Why?" "So China and India can overshadow the rest of the world," spat South Africa's president, Davu Abara. "Your concerns are valid, Abara," replied Vazel, adjusting her glasses before continuing. "It is important that we respond in a manner that is both timely and equitable. I therefore agree with Lenfield's position of 2 representatives per nation." "Anishi." Hearing this, Abara visibly relaxed, the tension and outrage in his posture transferring instead to Lau. "This is outrageous," the chairman barked, slamming his open palm down onto the table. "My duty is to represent the interests of China, and I will under no circumstances support such ludicrously lopsided representation. Either we base this on population as we should, or I veto it." No. It took all my willpower to keep a neutral expression as the meeting rapidly devolved from decorum to disaster. Leaders began to speak over each other as Vassell slammed down her gavel in a fruitless attempt to garner silence from the lot. President Stine repeatedly attempted to calm the tension, but each time he was interrupted either by Novikov, Chen, or even Abara. The message hit my earpiece at the same time as it did many others throughout the room. Lenfield's eyes went wide as he checked the notification on his cell phone. Leaning down towards Stine, I whispered into his ear just loud enough to cut through the room's noise at a close range. "A new signal is being broadcast. It looks like an encrypted video channel. Naziand, Konbadei." Other leaders received similar news from their own intelligence agents around the same time. It was one thing to discuss a bomb in the abstract, but another entirely to have one placed in front of you, with its fuse already lit. Lenfield was the first to speak up through the confusion, pacing around the table anxiously. "The ship's sending us another signal," he damn near shouted, his tone almost reverent. "It's encrypted, but not heavily. The SETI supercomputer can crack it in 5 minutes. Dao." Taking the opportunity to posture, Lau regarded the researcher with a grin of smug superiority. "Ours can do it in 2, he replied, gesturing for his aides to get at it immediately. Suddenly everyone in the chamber was barking commands at their respective underlings, each one demanding that the signal be decoded as soon as possible. Within minutes, every country with a spare supercomputer had successfully decoded the message. All that was left was to reply. One by one, world leaders were handed tablets and laptops with the decoded signal. Lau was first, a fact he clearly took great pride in. Using our own fastest computers, my organization was the second to decode the signal less than a minute later, placing a laptop in front of President Stine. Silence fell throughout the chamber as we all looked upon the impossible creature on the other side of our screens. What stared back at us wasn't the little green men or greys of popular culture, but rather something that resembled a centipede made of crystal. Faint colors shimmered beneath its glassy exterior like the hot glow of a living furnace. I could tell it was big by the way it moved, slow and deliberate, like a statue given will. 2 sets of claws protruded from the segments of its body leading up to the head. The lower pair looked like the result of a dalliance between a lobster's claws and a piece of construction equipment, easily large enough to wrap around a grown man's torso, and no doubt accompanied by the crushing force to shear through bone. The upper claws were considerably less brutal-looking, each bearing 3 pincers with which it tapped upon the console in front of it. "Dear God," I heard Mikhail murmur beneath his breath as he surveyed the creature before us, his eyes understandably lingering on the lower claws. Lenfield, meanwhile, looked like someone whose wildest dream had just become a reality. I could see the way his gaze took in every detail of the entity before us, no doubt already theorizing on the environment they'd originated from. "It's beautiful," I heard him whisper. For a second, the creature's mandibles clicked as it regarded us, a gesture that made Bauer and Lau recoil slightly as though afraid it might snatch them through the screen. Then, after a short hiss, it reached down with the delicate claws and typed something onto the crystalline keyboard in front of it. We heard it speak,